Evan was not a soldier. He was not a spy. He was not a hero. He was just a tired human writer who worked for the Galactic Observation Corps. His job sounded exciting when he first applied. He imagined traveling to distant worlds, meeting strange species, learning their cultures, and sending reports back to Earth. But reality was different. Most of his work was paperwork, dull interviews, and translating old documents. He drank cheap station coffee and stared at screens for hours. Still, he cared about his work because he loved stories. He believed every species had a story worth telling. The Zadari Empire was different. From the moment Evan first read about them, he felt something heavy in his chest. The Zadari were one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. Their territory was large, their military elite, their traditions strict. Other species spoke about them with fear and respect. Even diplomats lowered their voices when talking about the Zadari. There were rumors about their laws, about their silent royal court, about executions without trials, about a queen no one dared to describe. And the strangest part, there was almost no real information about their daily life. No honest reports. No journals. No cultural analysis. Nothing. Evan hated empty spaces in history. He hated when fear erased truth. During his first assignment on the Zadari capital world, he walked the streets quietly, observing everything. He noticed how citizens moved like shadows. They walked fast, heads lowered, shoulders tense. No one laughed loudly. No one argued in public. Vendors sold food in silence, bowing to customers. Even children played without shouting. It felt like the whole city was made of glass, beautiful but fragile. If someone spoke too loudly, maybe everything would crack. He wrote all of it in his private notes, even though he knew he was not supposed to. The Zadari government only allowed approved cultural reports. Those reports were dry, empty, and full of praise. They talked about discipline, order, and honor, but ignored fear, sadness, and humanity. Evan felt angry whenever he read them. He wanted to show the real Zadari, not the mask they wore. Inside homes, he saw families eating together but speaking softly. There was love, but it lived behind closed doors. He saw old men feeding stray animals when guards were not looking. He saw teenage boys painting small symbols on walls, then quickly wiping them off before patrols passed. He saw young mothers patting dust from their children's hair and whispering warnings to never speak against the Empire. He saw life trying to survive beneath fear. At night, he could not sleep. His brain replayed those moments like scenes in a film. He imagined what it felt like to grow up in a world where your voice was dangerous, where even laughter had to hide. He sat at his desk, opened his tablet, and wrote everything with shaking fingers. He described the streets, the markets, the quiet festivals, the silence that wrapped around everything like an invisible chain. He wrote about the soldiers, too. They marched in perfect lines, armor polished, eyes forward. They looked like machines, cold and emotionless. But Evan did not believe they were machines. He saw one soldier pause to help an old woman cross a busy street. He saw another soldier secretly give candy to a kid. Evan wrote those moments down too, because truth was not just cruelty, truth was everything. But the most dangerous thing Evan wrote about was the Queen. No one described the Queen, not in books, not in documents, not in conversation. The Zadari believed speaking about the Queen was disrespectful unless you were a priest or a government official. Most people avoided even saying her name. But Evan saw her once during a parade. She stood on a balcony, wearing a long violet robe with iron patterns. The crowd fell silent like they were holding their breath. She did not look cruel. She did not look angry. She looked tired. Her eyes scanned the crowd with a sadness that Evan did not expect. It lasted only a second, but it stayed in his mind for weeks. At 3 a.m. one night, he wrote, "The Queen's eyes are not sharp like blades. They are heavy like old stone. Maybe she carries the silence too. Every time he wrote something like that, his heart pounded. He knew he was breaking their law. He knew he was not supposed to write emotional truth. But he could not stop. No one else was doing it. Everyone else was too afraid. And fear made him furious. One day his supervisor found one small passage in his notes and went pale. She slammed the tablet shut and whispered harshly, "Destroy these. Do you want to die, Evan? Do you want the Iron Palace to come for you?" But Evan just stared at her and said nothing. Because for the first time in his life, his writing felt important. It felt brave. And that was how the forbidden story began. The message arrived quietly, but it changed everything. A single silver slip floated into Evan's quarters, carried by a silent drone. There was no seal, no signature, no words of explanation. Only one sentence, written in the Zidari imperial script. "You will present yourself at the Iron Palace by dawn." Evan stared at it for what felt like hours. His hands shook, and the cheap coffee on his desk had gone cold. He read it again. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. The Iron Palace. The seat of power. The Queen herself, summoned, no intermediaries. No warnings. Nothing but the command. Fear gripped his chest like icy fingers. He knew that very few humans had ever entered the Iron Palace alive. He knew that almost everyone who had displeased the Zidari vanished quietly, their names erased from every record. His roommate, a fellow human observer named Milo, saw the slip and paled. "Evan, you have to run. Burn every note. Destroy the tablet." "Don't wait," Milo said, voice trembling. His eyes darted to the door, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "They'll come for you. They don't make mistakes." Evan shook his head, his fingers tightening around the silver paper. "I can't," he said softly. "I didn't lie, I just wrote the truth." Milo stepped back. "The truth will kill you here." But Evan did not move. For the first time, he realized that fear had defined him as much as the Zidari defined their empire. Fear had silenced millions. Fear had painted their streets in shadows and whispered rules into every home. And now, standing in his small room with the silver slip, Evan felt something unfamiliar, courage. Or perhaps it was just stubbornness. At dawn, he left the quarters. The city streets were quiet, almost empty, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Citizens passed by without looking at him. Children ran past, speaking in whispers, stopping abruptly when a patrolling soldier's boots echoed nearby. Smoke rose from distant chimneys, curling upward in slow spirals, catching the soft pink light of the morning. Evan's heart beat rapidly. Every step toward the Iron Palace felt heavier than the last, but he walked anyway. The journey across the bridge was unlike anything he had imagined. The bridge was enormous, stretching over a wide black river that reflected the towering palace walls like a shattered mirror. Gigantic statues of Zidari warriors lined the sides, their claws raised as if to strike invisible enemies. Evan's eyes were drawn to their perfect symmetry, their polished armor shining even under the morning light. A chill ran down his spine. The silence around him was absolute, as if the bridge itself held its breath in anticipation of his fate. At the palace gates, guards in polished silver masks and dark armor stopped him. They said nothing. They only measured him with eyes that never blinked. Evan felt exposed, as if they could see every thought in his mind. Every step through the gates echoed like a drumbeat in a tomb. Courtyards stretched endlessly, filled with statues, fountains, and gardens that were both beautiful and threatening. The air smelled faintly of iron and smoke, a combination that somehow made Evan's stomach churn. Finally, after what felt like hours, a pair of massive metal doors opened, and Evan was ushered into the Hall of Judgment. The space was enormous, its ceilings lost in darkness. Cold light from hanging crystal prisms reflected across the polished floors. At the far end, under banners of deep violet and silver, sat the queen. Even from afar, her presence felt immense like gravity. She did not rise at first. She did not speak. She only watched, and the room seemed to shrink around her gaze. Evan felt a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. The stories he had read could not prepare him for the reality of standing in front of the ruler of the Zidari Empire. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the silence of 1,000 years contained in her stare. Yet, in that moment, he also felt something fragile beneath it, a human-like quality he could almost sense. Not cruelty, not wrath, perhaps sadness. A masked official stepped forward and spoke in a booming voice that made Evan's heart pound. This human has written unauthorized analysis of the Zidari Empire. He has described military operations, cultural practices, and the queen herself. His actions are considered treasonous. The hall seemed to exhale in unison. Guards stiffened, and a few officials gasped. Evan's stomach turned. He expected rage. He expected immediate punishment. He expected death. Then the queen spoke, softly but clearly. And the words carried through the hall like a command from the universe itself. Step forward. Human. Evan obeyed, each step echoing across the cold floor. Every breath felt loud. Every heartbeat was a drum of fear and anticipation. As he reached the center of the hall, he saw the queen rise slightly, her eyes fixed on him. She did not look angry. She did not look cruel. She only looked curious. And for the first time in his life, Evan realized that the story he had written, the story everyone else was too afraid to write, was about to be judged by the very person it described. The hall was enormous, but it felt smaller now that Evan was standing at its center. Every eye in the room was on him. The guards, statuesque and unmoving, the officials, stiff and pale, and the few scribes who had dared enter, all of them watched him as if he were a fragile bird caught in a predator's claws. And above it all, the queen's gaze weighed heavier than stone. It was quiet, unblinking, and yet full of life in a way Evan had never expected. She rose slightly from her throne, her violet robes flowing like liquid night. Her movements were minimal, deliberate, controlled. Even without words, she commanded the hall. Evan swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally came, felt too small. I did not mean to dishonor your empire," he said. "I only wanted to show the truth, the real life of your people." The queen tilted her head, just a fraction, and her eyes pierced him. "Truth is not a matter for discussion, human," she said. Her voice was soft, yet it carried a strange power. It made the guards straighten, the officials flinch, and Evan's heart hammer in his chest. "You have written about things no one is permitted to write about." Why? Evan's mind raced. He could lie. He could beg. He could grovel on the cold floor and promise obedience for the rest of his life. But the words he had written were not lies. They were simple, honest observations. And lying now would feel like burying fire. He took a deep breath, the weight of the hall pressing on him. "Because no one else would," he said finally. His voice shook, but he did not step back. "Everyone is afraid. Afraid of punishment. Afraid of silence. Afraid of what might happen if they speak the truth. I was just tired of silence. I wanted someone to see the real Zidari, not the mask everyone shows." A hush fell over the room. Even the guards' breathing seemed louder. Evan's hands were trembling now, and he felt sweat running down his neck. But he stood his ground. His words hung in the air, sharp as glass. The queen was still, and the silence felt like it would last forever. Then slowly she spoke again. "Do you think yourself brave?" Her eyes held no judgment yet, only curiosity, as if she were weighing his very soul. Evan shook his head. "No," he said. "I am not brave. I am only human. I write what I see. I write what others are too afraid to write. That is all." Her gaze softened slightly, or maybe it was just an illusion of the hall's strange light. "You have broken the law," she said, her voice steady, unyielding. "You have exposed thoughts and truths that are forbidden. You have described my people, and even me. Do you understand the consequences?" Evan nodded. He did not flinch. "I do, but I cannot unsee what I saw. I cannot unknow what I know. If silence continues, if no one writes the truth, nothing will ever change. Nothing will ever live fully. People will remain shadows in their own lives, afraid to laugh, afraid to speak, afraid to be human." The Queen raised one hand, and a guard stepped forward to unroll a metallic scroll. Its surface shimmered in the hall's dim light. "Bring the writings," she commanded. Evan watched as the scroll glided across the floor and stopped in front of the throne. He felt his stomach twist. Every word he had written, the streets, the soldiers, the festivals, the quiet love, the hidden laughter, was now in front of the very person he had written about. The Queen leaned slightly forward and scanned the writing. She read slowly, deliberately. Evan could see her eyes trace the words, lingering on moments of small kindness, fleeting joy, and hidden sorrow. She paused at descriptions of soldiers quietly helping citizens. She lingered on the pages that spoke of families whispering to their children, teaching them how to survive under fear. Then her eyes fixed on a single line, his note about her own eyes. "The Queen's eyes are not cruel. They are tired. Maybe she is trapped by her own crown," she read aloud softly, almost to herself. The hall was still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Officials exchanged nervous glances. Guards' hands twitched near their weapons. And the Queen, she remained quiet, staring at the words as if trying to understand a world beyond her walls. Evan's heart raced. He felt a wave of fear so intense it made his knees weak. He expected anger, fury, punishment, perhaps even death. But the Queen did not speak. She did not raise a hand to strike. She did not shout. She did not move. She simply looked. In that silence, Evan realized something he had never imagined possible. For the first time, the Queen was seeing him not as a trespasser, not as a criminal, not as a human, but as a witness. Someone who had dared to notice. Someone who had dared to write what everyone else was too afraid to say. And that silence, long and fragile, was the beginning of everything. The hall remained silent after the Queen read Evan's words. The officials shifted nervously, and the guards' armor clinked as they adjusted their stance. It was the kind of silence that made the air feel heavier, thick with anticipation. Everyone waited for the inevitable: judgment, death, imprisonment, exile, something terrible. But the Queen did not speak at first. She simply stared at Evan, her violet eyes piercing through him. Evan's hands were still trembling, but he kept them at his sides. He could feel every heartbeat, loud in his chest, every shallow breath, every flicker of fear in his veins. Yet he did not step back. He had come this far, and he could not hide now. Finally the Queen spoke, her voice steady and commanding. "You broke the law," she said. "You wrote about things no human or no Zidari was allowed to write. You described my empire. You described my people. You described me. Why?" Evan took a deep breath. His voice shook, but he forced it out. "Because I saw what no one else wanted to see," he said. "Because fear is everywhere in your empire. It lives in the streets, in the homes, in every child who whispers instead of laughs. People hide who they are, and I wanted someone to notice. Someone to remember that your people are alive, even if they are afraid." The Queen's expression did not change. Her eyes did not soften, and her voice did not waver. Yet something in her gaze flickered curiosity, perhaps, or the faintest hint of wonder. "Do you think honesty excuses disobedience?" she asked. Evan shook his head. No, he said. I do not think it excuses anything. I know the law is strict. I know that I am breaking it. But hiding the truth, that is worse than any punishment. If the world never sees the truth, it forgets people exist. It forgets life and fear. Fear is not strength. It is a prison. The Queen leaned back slightly, as if considering his words. The hall was so silent that Evan could hear the faintest clink of a guard's chain, the soft rustle of robes, even the quiet hum of the crystal prisms above. Officials exchanged glances. Some whispered behind their hands, daring to hope. Others paled, certain that disaster was imminent. You speak of fear, the Queen said slowly, as if you understand it. Yet you are human. You have not lived under the weight of our history. You do not carry the responsibility of the throne. You do not know what it costs to rule an empire, to hold power for centuries without letting it shatter. Evan's throat tightened, but he did not step back. Maybe I do not, he said. But I see it. I see how it touches everyone, even you. You are not cruel. You are tired, burdened. The crown weighs on you. And that burden has silenced your people. I only wrote what I saw because someone had to. Someone had to show that life still exists beneath fear. A murmur ran through the officials. Guards shifted uncomfortably. The Queen's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. She paused longer than Evan thought possible, letting the weight of his words sink into the hall like water into stone. Then she spoke again. You speak of things that are dangerous, she said. You describe truths that others would never dare to write. Do you understand the consequences? Evan nodded. Yes, he said. I understand. I do not expect mercy. I only ask. Let my words be seen, even if I am punished for them. Let them exist. Let someone remember that fear does not erase life. The Queen was silent again. Her gaze drifted toward the scroll on the stand, Evan's writings gleaming under the hall lights. She ran her fingers lightly across the metallic surface, a gesture so delicate it almost seemed human. She read passages silently, lingering on small moments, the laughter hidden in the streets, the kindness of soldiers, the love in families who could never speak openly. Then she paused at the lines about herself. For a long moment, she said nothing. Evan's heart pounded. The officials shifted nervously. The guards' hands twitched near weapons. And in that silence, Evan realized something. He had not been judged yet. Not for fear, not for anger, not for punishment. He was being considered. You have broken the law, the Queen said finally. Yet, you have done what no one else could. You have shown me, and my empire, what we have hidden from ourselves. You speak truths that are dangerous, yes, but also necessary. Tell me, human, do you fear me? Evan swallowed, his voice firm despite the trembling inside. Yes, he said honestly, but I am more afraid of silence than of you. The Queen's gaze softened imperceptibly, as if tasting his courage. The hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. And in that quiet, Evan understood something he had never expected. Honesty itself could be a crime. But honesty could also be a key. A key strong enough to open doors even an empire had locked for centuries. The Queen's gaze shifted from Evan to the metallic scroll that contained all his writings. The hall was so quiet that every whisper, every movement, felt amplified. Officials leaned forward slightly, as if trying to read her thoughts before she spoke. Guards held their breath. Even the walls seemed to hum with tension. The Queen reached out and let her fingers glide over the surface of the scroll. The metallic pages shimmered, reflecting the faint violet light from above. She began to read silently, slowly, deliberately. Every line Evan had written seemed to take on life in her hands. She read about the streets where children whispered instead of laughed, where merchants bowed even when no one watched, where families ate together in silence, hiding love behind their walls. She paused at descriptions of soldiers quietly helping the elderly, giving food to children, protecting citizens without ever seeking reward. Evan stood near the center of the hall, his chest tight, his hands clasped. His heart pounded as if trying to escape his ribs. He could feel every eye in the room fixed on him. Yet his attention remained on the Queen. She read on, lingering at the smallest, most human details, almost as if she were discovering them for the first time herself. Then her eyes fell on the lines about her. Evan had been terrified to write them. The words were honest, careful, full of empathy, yet dangerous. He had described her eyes, her presence, her silence. He had dared to say that she was not cruel, only tired, burdened, and trapped by her own crown. He had written, "The Queen's eyes are not cruel. They are tired. Maybe she is trapped by her own crown." The Queen paused, letting her gaze drift from the scroll to Evan. For the first time, she did not speak. She did not frown. She did not move in judgment. She simply looked. And in that look, Evan felt something shift. Something impossible to describe: recognition, understanding, perhaps even relief. The officials whispered nervously. Guards stiffened. Some had seen humans executed for far less. But the Queen did not move. She seemed suspended in thought, her fingers tracing the metallic pages, her eyes distant yet sharp, piercing into a place Evan could not reach. She closed her eyes briefly, and when they opened again, there was a subtle change. The rigid weight of authority softened just enough for him to notice. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. A single, quiet, human smile. It was small, but it was real, and it cut through the fear in the hall like sunlight through stone. Gasps echoed through the officials. Guards blinked, unsure if the world had shifted. They had never seen the Queen smile before. It was said that she had ruled for decades without showing emotion, that her presence alone could command life and death. But here, before Evan, she smiled. And that smile did something extraordinary. It made the impossible feel real. "You wrote what others were too afraid to write," she said, her voice soft but carrying through the hall. "You described my empire as it truly is. You showed kindness, fear, courage, and life where others see only order and discipline. Your words, they are dangerous, but they are also necessary." Evan could barely breathe. He had imagined 1,000 ways this moment might end, none of them good. Yet here she was, reading his words with care, understanding, even gratitude. The tension in the hall, which had pressed on him like stone, began to shift. She continued reading, absorbing his descriptions of festivals without music, markets where people whispered to avoid punishment, children learning to hide their joy. Every scene, every small act of humanity, seemed to touch her in a way no one had imagined possible. Her hands hovered over the scroll as if she feared breaking the fragile honesty it contained. Finally, she looked at Evan again, and her violet eyes softened further. "For centuries," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "my empire has been silent. We have ruled through fear. We believed that fear made us strong. But your words, your honesty, reminds us that strength is not silence. Strength is life. Strength is courage. Strength is the ability to see and acknowledge the truth, even when it terrifies us." The officials were stunned. Guards were unsure how to react. Evan felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. He had written what he saw, what he knew, and now the Queen had not only read it, she had understood it. And then she spoke the words no one in the hall expected. "Your writings will not be destroyed. They will be preserved. And they will be shared." Evan's eyes widened. The risk he had taken, the danger he had faced, the fear that had gripped him every night, It had all led to this. He had not just written history. He had changed it. The queen rose fully from her throne, her expression calm but resolute. "Let this be known," she said. "Truth is not treason. Fear is not strength. Life must be seen, even in silence." In that moment, the hall seemed to breathe again. The weight of centuries of fear lifted, if only slightly, as everyone present realized that a single human, with nothing but honesty and courage, had done what no one else dared, and Evan understood the incredible power of words. The queen lowered the metallic scroll and let her fingers rest lightly on the polished stand. Evan could not look away. Every nerve in his body felt alive, as if the tension of the past days, months, and even years had all led to this single moment. The hall, once suffocating with the weight of fear, felt different now. There was a small, fragile space opening, a space where truth, honesty, and life could breathe. She looked at him again, her violet eyes soft but steady. For a moment, she did not speak. The silence stretched, holding the officials, the guards, and Evan himself in a shared pause that felt almost sacred. Then she did something no one in the hall had ever seen before. Slowly, carefully, she smiled. It was not a grand or victorious smile. It was not playful or boastful. It was quiet, human, and full of something Evan could not name: relief, understanding, recognition. The smile moved through the hall like sunlight through cold stone. Officials exchanged stunned glances. Guards stiffened, unsure if smiling at the queen was allowed or safe, and Evan felt his chest expand as if the air itself had changed. "You wrote what others feared," the queen said softly, her voice carrying like music through the high hall. "You told the truth about my people, about my empire, about me. And for that, you risked your life." Evan's throat tightened. He had feared every day, every night, that this moment would end with punishment. But here she was, not angry, not cruel. She was seeing him, seeing the human courage that had refused to bow to fear. "For centuries," she continued, "we have ruled with silence. We believed that silence made us strong. We believed that fear would hold our people in order. But your words, your honesty, remind us that strength is not in silence. Strength is life. Strength is courage. Strength is the ability to see and acknowledge truth, even when it terrifies us." Evan could hardly breathe. He wanted to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. All he could do was stand there and let the weight of her words wash over him. He realized then that his writing, his simple, honest words had reached across centuries of fear and into the heart of the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. The queen gestured to the officials. "Let it be known," she said, "that analysis of culture, observation of life, and the telling of truths are no longer forbidden. Those who write and speak honestly will not be punished. Those who share stories of our people will be honored." Murmurs ran through the hall. Officials whispered to one another. Some dared to smile. Guards relaxed slightly, though the shock of the moment still lingered in their eyes. And Evan felt as if he were standing on the edge of a new world. The queen turned back to him. "You risked everything for honesty," she said. "Few have done what you did. You remind us that even in a world built on fear, life finds a way to shine. Your words have opened a door that no law can close." Evan swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, to tell her that her acknowledgement was enough, that he had only done what any human would have done if they cared enough. But no words came. All he could do was nod, letting the weight of her recognition sink in. In the days that followed, the empire began to change in ways that had seemed impossible. Citizens began to speak softly in markets. Children began to laugh openly in courtyards. Families shared small joys without fear. Soldiers still marched with discipline, but there were moments of kindness now, small gestures that had once been hidden. Music returned to festivals, whispered first, then louder, until it spread through streets that had been silent for generations. Evan was invited to schools, academies, and councils to speak about writing, observation, and the importance of seeing life clearly. He met young Zadari who had never dared raise their voices in poetry or song, and they listened to him as if he carried fire in his hands. Everywhere he went, he saw the ripple of change. The Queen's smile, small and human, seemed to grow in strength. It was whispered in corridors, reflected in the cautious laughter of citizens, and even seen in the eyes of soldiers who once had known only order and fear. And through it all, Evan understood something profound. A single human, armed with nothing but honesty and courage, could touch the heart of an empire, could remind it of life, of joy, of humanity, could change the world not with weapons or power, but with words. And somewhere deep inside, in the quiet corners of his heart, Evan smiled back.